This is episode 674 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I'm very pleased to be joined by Jim Winchester. He is the executive director of the Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico, also known as IPANM. Welcome to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Jim, or welcome back, I should say.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Appreciate it. Great to be back here.
Yeah, we'll talk a little bit about what is coming at the energy industry, especially, of course, New Mexico's oil and gas industry, and even more specifically, the independent, also known as small oil or little oil, not big oil. But let's get started with a few biographical backgrounds, details about yourself, and about what your industry, your specific interest group does. You're in Santa Fe and how you try to represent that industry.
Sure. Thanks, Paul. Well, yes, as you mentioned, executive director of the Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico. I'm in my 8th year in that position. And as you mentioned, we are the voice for independent producers in the state of New Mexico. And by independence, what we mean is those producers that are not fully integrated as what are considered major producers, like the Chevrons and the Exxons and those other ones that you see that not only produce oil and gas at the site, but also control the distribution and midstream out of the various basins, and then also have facilities on the upstream market, which is specifically the gas stations that you see. So independents tend to be a lot smaller. There are larger independents, of course, but our average size of oil and gas producer is 12 employees. So we're talking about companies that are smaller. A lot of them work with subcontractors to actually do the drilling and other various aspects of their business. And we tend to have an important role in the state of New Mexico because a lot of the jobs and a lot of the folks that we employ are local, and that's important to our overall economy. So yeah, it's definitely an exciting time as always in the oil and gas industry. We continue to see New Mexico oil and gas production pushing upwards of 3 million barrels per day, which is just astounding considering the growth that we've seen over the course of the last couple of years in particular. The hottest oil and gas basin play in the world continues to be the New Mexico Permian Basin. The Delaware Basin is the sub-basin of the Permian, and that's located entirely within the confines of New Mexico. So exciting times for sure.
Now, I want to ask a couple of things before we get into the meat and potatoes of the legislative session. One is last year, for example, there was the so-called clean fuel standard, which did wind up passing. And we at the Rio Grande Foundation stood up alongside you and your organization. And it pretty much was just us, as far as I recall. There was maybe some environmental groups that expressed some concerns for their own reasons, but it was pretty much just our groups that stood up and opposed that clean fuel standard. Unfortunately, the oil and gas association, NMOGA, wound up being in favor of that. Now, I'm not trying to drive any wedges into that relationship, but kind of walk through how the size of the business in the oil and gas industry is impacted and the interest might differ. And especially with this governor who has seemed to cozy up to the big producers and the big players while still trying to stick it to the independents. Kind of just however you
Yeah,
want to attack that.
sure. So just for my memory, and we had very close conversations with our counterparts at the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, and we appreciate the partnership that we have. Um, my understanding is on that bill, they stood neutral, but they did have some of their larger members, um, the super majors that were in support of that. And specifically, their reasoning for that is that there was some built-in tax credits that they could be eligible for, which made the bill something that they were interested in because it would have provided some relief monetarily. So we understood that from the get-go. I do want to stress that as an industry, we do remain united. But we certainly have issues that are unique to independents as opposed to the super majors. In general, not just this bill, but other bills, you'll see that independents are really fighting for saving every dollar they can in the course of production. And when we see regulations or proposals for increased royalties, et cetera, that disproportionately will hit the smaller producers. And what I mean by that is that the larger producers have quantities of scale. They have large numbers of wells, and they have built up reserves within their operations that can cover increases for regulatory costs, here and there. When you have a smaller operator that's dealing with, a couple dozen wells, and you see a 5% increase in some cost stream, that is going to affect their bottom line a lot more significantly than it would to a larger operator. So when we see some of these challenges within the industry itself between independents and majors, it's just that we're focused on different priorities. I do want to say that, the Independent Petroleum Association of New Mexico has a broad membership, including a lot of the super majors. Now, those majors cannot be on our board of directors, and they understand that. They support IPANM because of our work to support industry overall. So the communication is very clear when we go into particular bills where there might be some subtle differences. And we talk a lot about that behind the scenes and then tactically work to try to get bills in a position that would best serve both of our constituents. Getting back to the clean fuel standards, that's a disappointing development last year when that passed and was signed by the governor from our perspective. I think the concern is that a lot of the increased costs with those clean fuel standards will eventually get passed along to the consumers. And likewise, those costs then get passed along through the entire chain of production, which of course then hits independents as well. So yeah, that's a development that we were certainly opposed to. I think there's going to be about 5 states now in the country that do this. And again, in our perspective, unfortunately, that's going to have a negative effect on New Mexico consumers and continues to drive up, the cost of gasoline prices. And we'll see this escalate gradually over the next 10 years. At this point, our focus is elsewhere as we continue to work on other bills that would have just as much of a dramatic impact on us, but also on consumers.
All right. Well, let's get into it then. We have the 60-day legislative session coming up, just starting in a matter of days.
Mhm.
And uh, oil and gas is one of the top targets for the progressives in the legislature. And we know that there are bills that have been put forth in the past that are going to be put forth again, and some of those may pass this time. But what is maybe your highest priority or two in terms of prospective attacks on the industry? Are there any policies that are maybe positive for the industry, but especially what are your highest priorities as we hit this session?
Certainly. And I'll just step back for just a moment and again remind folks, most of your audience, I'm sure already knows, overall, the New Mexico oil and gas industry, contributes billions of dollars, increasing each year to the state budget, which is why we've seen the budget actually go up in terms of the amount of money that is being able to be spent to improve our state. So right now, again, we're flirting anywhere from funding 1/3 to 1/2 of all the state revenue that comes in. So we are the biggest industry, and we certainly provide a lot of things that benefit a lot of people. So it continues to be unfortunate, however, in this state in particular, where we do see a lot of progressives in elected positions, where they do attack the industry, for lack of a better word, and they use whatever mechanisms they can legislatively, because their philosophy is to end fossil fuels now. I think we've seen the tone change on the national level, but obviously that has not been the case here in New Mexico. And it's unfortunate considering that we're the second largest producing oil and gas state in the country, only behind Texas. So with that aside, yeah, I think as we look over the landscape of what particular challenges and bills we see coming, some bills have been pre-filed and probably many more at the point that many people are watching this. But right off the bat, I can tell you that as we did sort of last year have this fight evolve, it's probably coming back with a little more force now, where there is some bills in place to mandate 1 mile setbacks for producing oil and gas drilling within areas that are near schools or other provisions such as house dwellings, hospitals, etc. Um, I want to make sure the public understands the guise, if you will, under which these bills are being called is a safe child health zone. That's a misnomer. It is a setback. And the specific reason for the setback is not based on anything scientifically. It's based on the fact that that's less drilling, that progressives will then be able to say that they're forcing the oil and gas industry not to be able to produce, which is, again, unfortunate. It's an attack bill. The current draft of a bill that we're seeing in there right now on the House side is calling for a 1 mile setback from schools with some additional provisions. We've known this bill has been in the works for some time, and there was variations of it included in other bills this past session. At the moment, we and will probably continue to stand strongly opposed to any setback proposal. And the reason being is that this situation and this concern about drilling and having wells closer to schools and other areas has been hashed and rehashed through for many, many years, and done specifically at the local municipality level. For example, around the city of Carlsbad, where there already exists a 500-foot mandatory setback around schools. And that is something that was done over the course of many years and included what we would consider very non-biased studies that show minimal to no impact on emissions, within that buffer zone. And frankly, the number that scientifically can be proven is up to 250 feet. So in our minds, Carlsbad already doubles that. It's also a situation where 1 mile setback is not a one size fits all. There's different geography, there's different components, there's different historical wells that are already in certain locations where the cities have actually grown towards the wells, as opposed to wells perhaps being produced and getting closer to cities. So this is a very nuanced bill, and you've got to be careful when listening to the arguments, because a lot of the studies that the environmentalists are proposing, and they're quite frankly saying that oil and gas is single-handedly, by drilling closer to these schools, killing children, which is not true. The studies that they're using are funded entirely by environmental groups, and they're not even being done by engineers. They're being done by environmental lawyers. So we have a fight on our hands on this one, and we want to make clear to the public that we are not opposed to certain distances as already mandated, but it's a local issue, and they've looked at it closer. And 1 mile, for example, setback and additional setbacks that are being proposed would have devastating consequences, and in some cases, like the San Juan Basin, potentially uh, withhold the ability to drill on about 50% of their lands. So this is a major deal right now, and it would be a definite setback in general, for lack of a better word, to the entire industry and development of the state.
So that's your top priority, and that one, is there any scientific evidence that a mile is the right amount? And real quick, I guess, as you answer that, uh, we're talking about existing wells and removing those. How does that specifically work? Obviously, it's one thing to not drill a new well in an
Hmm.
area where there might be a school or something, but are we talking about existing wells now, or is that something possibly in the future?
Well, in this particular bill, no, existing wells will be able to remain.
Okay.
However, language is often substituted in throughout the course of committees in various provisions that would then, at the last minute, change the entire parameters of the bill. So we've got to be on our toes and look out for that, because it's sort of a sneaky process that occurs. Um, so there is one bill already filed. We expect that there will be several others that will be more restrictive and perhaps include provisions such as that. So at this point, yeah, we're concerned about anything and everything that could be coming forward. We haven't seen all those bills yet.
Okay. Yeah, there probably will be multiple bites at the apple. All right. Well, I know that the land commissioner is looking for higher royalty payments. There are efforts to open up the Oil and Gas Act. What are some of the other issues that you're looking at?
Sure. I think we can start with royalties. Um, State Land Office has floated this bill for 5 or 6 sessions consecutively at this point, and have failed to get it across the finish line, because we believe the moderate Democrats and the Republicans all recognize that increasing the highest tier of royalty rates from 20% to 25% would again have an inverse disproportionate impact on the smaller producers. That is less money that they are able to use to continue to operate. Now, that sort of an increase does not affect quantities of scale in the larger producers. So we have actually seen some of the larger producers either stand silent on it, or neutral, or in some cases they are working with the State Land Office to try to get it past the finish line. The State Land Office likes to compare 25% royalty rate at the highest level in Texas to the 20% in New Mexico. Therefore, we need to get quote unquote our fair share. That's not true. That's not an apples to apples comparison. If you look at the entire cost of production per barrel in all producing states in the country, New Mexico, because of all the various taxes, is the highest. So adding on an increased royalty fee makes it even less um, optimum and less and more restrictive for smaller producers to be able to drill and produce from those wells. So IPANM stands strongly opposed to this. I will note, and I think this is important to note, that this is a legislative issue. The State Land Office is taking it into their hands as a result of this bill not getting through previous sessions, to unilaterally decide that they are no longer going to lease those premium tracks at 20% until they get a legislative bill through and that's signed by the governor that calls for 25% increase. And frankly, that is the State Land Office getting very political and getting outside of their lane and trying to force the legislature into making this sort of a decision. I'm not sure if that tactic's going to work. The only ones who are losing right now as a result of that, withholding those tracks, are the state beneficiaries, because they're not getting the income that otherwise would be coming in with those uh, potential leases moving forward. So the State Land Office is directly attacking the state and the state beneficiaries by withholding these leases. And that's the bottom line.
Yeah. So talk about some of those additional expenses in any particular order you'd like, because
Sure.
we've got the gross receipts tax. That's one that obviously the Rio Grande Foundation is most aware of, most involved in. New Mexico's gross receipts tax raises costs for a lot of producers of a lot of different things across our economy, not just oil and gas. Is that the big one that makes a difference in raising the expenses of oil producers in New Mexico, or is there more?
Well, it's the combination, and it's certainly a big one. Obviously, in all businesses, specifically in the smaller business world, this gross receipt tax is a very poor way of doing business in New Mexico and makes us less attractive in general to all businesses. And until the legislature takes it upon themselves to change this, specifically the Democrats who are in the position of power, we're going to continue to be a regressive tax policy state. And so that certainly hurts our producers. There are a number of different tax buckets, if you will, on production. Everything from severance tax to ad valorem taxes to oil and reclamation fund taxes that are computed based on each barrel of production. And again, the most recent study done on this indicates that New Mexico is the highest. We are continuing to look into that from an analysis standpoint, and may have some new numbers to present that show that even to a greater extent as we move forward into this session. So it's the combination of all these various buckets that we pay into, and including some of these buckets, for example, oil and reclamation, where the legislature has changed where that money goes. It's supposed to go into remediating oil and gas wells that are orphaned or abandoned. But most of that money is going straight into the general fund. So we're getting, in some cases, hit for things, and that money is going for things that were not intended for. So that brings up a bill that we are working on and will pop up during the session that we support, and that's to fix the reclamation fund funding mechanism. So what happened about 15 years ago is that the reclamation fund was adjusted to have that money that's intended to go to remediating wells. 15/17 of that money now goes into the general fund. So we're looking to fix that and make sure that the money that oil and gas is contributing for reclamation actually goes to reclamation. So you'll see that coming up, and at this point, we know we've got some bipartisan support on that, and we certainly hope that that bill goes through and that the governor sees the wisdom in fixing that.
Yeah, you hear a lot in the media and a lot of news articles about the money needed to remediate these abandoned oil and gas wells, et cetera, et cetera. But as you say, the money's already there. It just needs to be allocated and used, right?
Correct. And in addition to that, I will say that the oil and gas reclamation fund balance as it sits right now, even without those fixes, is above $50 million. So, the state is getting better at spending that money, but they need to do some reforms to how they allocate that money so it can get out the door to actually do what's intended to do. And so when we hear other proposals, for example, one of the bills that we are concerned about coming is an increase to financial assurance bonding on operators to increase the amount of money they need to put into escrow to be held by the state, which they can then use later on if that particular operator goes out of business. Then they have a certain amount of money they can use to environmentally clean up those remaining wells that are there. But our question will be, why are we looking to increase financial assurance when the state cannot even spend the money that they have in there now? So there are some serious bureaucratic layers that need to be fundamentally changed in order for the state to do a better job of even handling the money that they have.
All right. Well, other issues of note to the industry.
Sure, I think we're going to see a lot of water bills this particular session. And uh, the governor's big bill is this strategic water bill that she's trying to push through with the Environment Department taking lead. And this is a big both opportunity, but also raises some red flags about the mechanics of this bill in terms of what they're trying to do. First of all, industry in general supports uses of produced water um, for other areas upon its cleanup and its reuse. Currently, right now, for example, of produced water, that's the water that's brought up during production from underground, is already being recycled at levels of nearly 50 to 60% in the field. So we're already doing this very high amount of recycled water, which is reducing the amount of fresh water. Um, Part of the bill of the strategic water bill that's come up without the consulting of industry is to slap a 5 cent per barrel fee on produced water that's coming up and not recycled by producers. And this proposal came out of nowhere without consulting the industry. And by assessing that amount of money, they are hoping to use the millions of dollars that will be raised off that to push through a lot of their water initiatives and to pay for this. The problem with this is that this creates potential gridlock on the produced water disposal end of things because right now, um, uh, water that's not recycled is either being disposed of deep underground safely, or it's being trucked out to Texas so that they can go ahead and take that water and then they're paying a fee for it to be disposed in Texas. What this fee will do is essentially um, uh, make that process a lot more costly, and in some cases will deter further drilling because there's going to be added costs coming up with the produced water that's there. And what we're seeing from the Oil Conservation Division, again, we're getting into the weeds here, is that they're not permitting new underground disposal wells right now. So essentially what we're getting to is a point where we could have all this produced water and the only option will be to truck it out of state, which is not benefiting the environment. It's not benefiting anybody. It is benefiting Texas, who's collecting fees to take that money. So we're creating more problems by throwing this proposal in there than was ever considered and never discussed with the state. So again, intention, regardless of whatever it is, in some cases, it's just to punitively punish oil and gas industry and make them pay more money. In other cases, there may be some intention to actually do some good. The unintended consequences outweigh the purpose of the bill.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit more about water and produced water. So, when you drill oil and gas wells, there's this produced water that comes up, and it's got a lot of toxins and minerals in it and things that need to be treated out of it. And obviously, we see what's going on in California with the lack of water. We know water is an issue, always ever present in New Mexico. It does seem that it would be wise to do something with that water, but it's obviously not cheap and not easy to treat that water. So, I mean, I think you and I generally are opponents of a lot of what the governor does, but it seems like relative to kind of the progressive and the Democratic base, she's actually more right than they are. But it sounds like neither side of that, the Democratic Party on this issue is really on target. But Could she get
Yeah.
on target? Is this something that
Well, you
you
know,
you see as a
yeah,
possible win?
conceptually, we're all for anything that incentivizes the use of produced water to be recycled and reused in drilling. And I can tell you, 7 years ago, maybe 10% of produced water was being recycled. We're now up into 50, 60%. We would rather see tax credits and incentives to encourage more produced water recycling as opposed to a punitive tax, which is what this is, to continue production. And even without this proposal, what we've already seen in the past 5 or 6 years demonstrates the commitment of industry to tackle this problem. But once again, when government gets involved and especially does not consult industry, they make the problem worse. So while the intention of a lot of the things in the strategic water bill are good and we support conceptually, the mechanics of it is bad and bad to awful and will make the problem worse. So that's sort of a lot of what we see in general in government, um, and this is therein lies the problem.
Got it. Well, not a surprise there because it seems like even when New Mexico politicians realize there's a problem, they settle on wrong solutions for those problems. Any other issues? We're 32 minutes in. We've got just a few minutes to
Sure.
go, but any other items you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think in general, to build on your last comment there, is that it's our job now as an industry, since the administration did not come to us. It's our job to go during this next 60 days and talk with the legislators and educate them on the consequences of what a lot of these bills could do from the negative perspective. Um, we're not using scare tactics, we're using science. And so that's sort of our philosophy. When we go to the facts, industry time and time again proves that we can do this. We have the innovation, and the way that we do it here as an industry is better than any other place in the world. So that's sort of the message we're bringing to the legislatures in all of these issues. We do anticipate that there'll be other things that will creep up. Um, it's just going to be a wait and see approach. There always seems to be one or two bills that surprise us in terms of where did that come from and why are we even doing that sort of deal. So I think just in general, the coordination that we have as an industry within our various trades, within the majors and the independents, is now as much as important than ever. And I can tell you that I think we are doing that very, very well. We're going to have some differences philosophically within industry, but we're communicating with each other when those differences occur and making sure that each is aware of what's going on. So from that standpoint, it's good. We're continuing to build coalitions with other non-oil and gas industries, whether that be a lot of the business community, folks like Rio Grande Foundation and agriculture or other industries in general, in which we all have the same overriding goal. And there's strength in numbers, specifically when we can do that. So I think those in general will be the main pitches and the focuses that we always will see being the keys to whether or not we can push back against some of this bad legislation and get some of this good legislation through.
All right. Well, if folks want to engage with their legislators or engage with your organization, is there an easy way to do that?
Sure. IPANM.org. We have a lot of good information on there. Everything from news stories to general topical information to help educate you and the folks out there about the various aspects of industry and the good, the bad, and the ugly in terms of what's being pushed through to try to, again, make it more difficult, unfortunately, for us to do business here in New Mexico. So A lot of facts and information there. Again, IPANM.org. Very proud of the Independent Petroleum Association. We have over 350 members, and that encompasses over 125 companies. So we continue to see growth, and our impact on the state continues to be as strong and as important as ever. So.
Now, real quick, in addition to that, is there a way for people to sign up to be alerted to bills specifically
Yes.
pertaining to IPA&M? If you could share that, that would be great.
Yeah, in fact, go to IPANM.org, and there will be a button there that you can click to go into to subscribe to our email list. And then that will provide you information as we move forward in the session.
Perfect. All right, Jim. Well, we'll be seeing you up in Santa Fe. I'm sure mostly fighting against some of these bad policies, but we'll do our best and look forward to seeing you up there. And thank you for your time.
Well, we really appreciate what you do, Paul. Appreciate the partnership that we have with your organization and your wonderful members. I can say that I think all of us think through the same lens, and the memberships are in agreement 99.9% of the time, if not 100%. So we really appreciate working with you guys.
All right. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.